Julian's laughter echoed through the heavy oak door, sharp and cold like the shattering of a 3-year delusion. She is too stupid to realize I have been using her, he sneered to his friends. He thinks I am just a milk cow for his fake empire. Little does he know. I have already drained every single penny. This is not a wedding. It is a public execution starting at exactly 11:45. My name is Elena Vance, and I woke up at exactly 5 in the morning to the cold, oppressive silence of a luxury hotel suite in downtown Seattle. There was no radiant glow of a bride-to-be warming my chest. Instead, a sharp, metallic tang coated the back of my throat, tasting like old blood and rusted iron. I lay still, staring at the ceiling as the gray light of dawn filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread clawing at my insides. Beside me, Julian Thorne was deep in a peaceful, undisturbed sleep. His profile was as sharp and perfect as a marble statue, the kind of man women turned their heads for in every room he entered. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, remembering every moment of the last 36 months. I had been the one to polish that perfection. I had paid for his designer wardrobe, his high-end skincare, his gym memberships, and even the lease on his silver sports car. For 3 years, I had bankrolled his entire existence, convinced that I was investing in a future built on mutual respect and love. Now, in the dim light, his beauty felt like a mask that was beginning to slip. My phone vibrated violently on the nightstand, cutting through the silence like a serrated blade. It was Clara, my lead assistant at Zenith Cloud Media. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the cold marble floor, and stepped into the bathroom before answering. "Elena, I am so sorry to call you on your wedding morning." "But something is wrong." Clara's voice was frantic, trembling with a fear that immediately mirrored my own. "Clara, talk to me." "What is it?" I whispered, my voice sounding like dry parchment. "The project budget for the summer campaign. It is gone. Elena, there is a massive deficit. I am looking at the ledgers now, and there are unauthorized transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moved in small increments over the last month." My heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against my ribs. "That is impossible. I am the only one with the primary authorization codes. That is the problem. The system shows they were authorized from your home IP address late at night. Elena, I think someone has been inside your personal accounts." I hung up the phone without another word. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely tie the silk sash of my robe. I caught my reflection in the mirror. My skin looked sallow, and my eyes were wide with a sudden, icy clarity. "It is just pre-wedding nerves," I lied to myself. I told my reflection that Clara was simply being overcautious, that we would sort the numbers out after the honeymoon, but the metallic taste in my mouth only grew stronger. I could not stay in that room. I dressed quickly in a simple wrap dress and grabbed my keys. I needed to be at the venue. I told myself I needed to check the acoustics and the lighting for the ceremony, a $150,000 event that I had paid for in full, down to the last orchid. The drive to the outskirts of the city was a blur of gray. Seattle was submerged in a thick, suffocating mist that turned the towering pines into jagged shadows. By the time I reached the ancient stone villa we had rented for the day, the atmosphere was dense and haunting. The dampness seemed to seep into my bones as I walked across the manicured lawn. The villa looked less like a romantic getaway and more like a fortress holding a dark secret. I entered through the side service door, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. The silence of the house was broken by a distant, muffled sound. I followed it toward the groom's lounge, a wood-paneled room tucked away at the end of the hall. As I drew closer, the sound became clearer. It was the clink of crystal against crystal, followed by a burst of boisterous, triumphant laughter. I froze. I knew that laugh. It was Julian. but it did not sound like the gentle, supportive man I had known for 3 years. It was loud, arrogant, and edged with a cruelty that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stopped inches away from the heavy oak door, which was left slightly ajar. To the bride, the most generous woman in all of Washington. Julian's voice boomed from inside, dripping with a sarcasm that felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I stood there, hidden by the shadows of the hallway, as the man I was supposed to marry in a few hours continued to speak with an energy I had never heard before. My breath hitched in my chest, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I reached out a trembling hand to steady myself against the cold stone wall, listening as the life I thought I knew began to crumble behind that door. Suddenly, Julian's voice rang out, booming with a sickening level of pride. I finally closed the deal. Julian's voice rang out, booming with a sickening level of pride. $120,000. Silas. Every cent of it is sitting in the clearing account right now, and the best part is, it is all legally tied to Elena's personal credit line. I heard the distinct clink of glasses. Marcus, Julian's longtime enabler, let out a low whistle. How did you manage that without her blowing a fuse? She is a shark in the boardroom. Julian, how did you get a shark to sign her own death warrant? Julian let out a sharp, mocking snort. Distraction is a powerful tool. You should have seen her during those endless dress fittings. She was so obsessed with the lace, the silk, and the perfect shade of white. She was practically vibrating with emotion. I just slipped the financial authorization forms into the middle of the vendor contracts. I told her it was for the catering deposit, and she just signed where I pointed. She was too caught up in her fairy tale to realize I was raiding the castle. But what about the wedding, man? Silas asked, his voice lower, more cautious. You are about to walk down the aisle. Do you actually feel... I don't know. Anything for her. She has taken care of you for 3 years. Love Julian's voice turned cold and dripping with pure, unadulterated disgust. Are you joking? I love the lifestyle she provides. I love her black cards and her unlimited credit limits, but her she is suffocating. She thinks her money makes her my superior. I have spent 36 months playing the supportive, doting partner while she worked 12-hour days to fund my ideas. I don't love her. I love the fact that she was stupid enough to be my personal bank. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure in my chest, as if a giant, invisible hand had reached inside and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. The air in the hallway felt thin, and my lungs burned, but I did not let out a sound. I did not cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It had already begun to crystallize into a hard, freezing rage. So, what is the end game? Marcus asked. The money is already moving, Julian replied. I could almost hear the smirk on his face. I have a script ready for a private transfer to an offshore crypto wallet. Once the ceremony starts, I am going to wait for the perfect moment. I am not just going to leave her. I am going to destroy her. I will stand at that altar and tell everyone that I cannot go through with it because of her mental instability. I will tell them she is controlling, that she is financially abusive, and that I have been a victim of her shadow side for years. By the time I walk out of here, she will look like a psychotic, broken woman, and I will be the tragic hero who finally found the courage to escape. I will have the $120,000, and she will have a nervous breakdown. My hand moved instinctively to the pocket of my wrap dress. I pulled out my phone, my movements slow and deliberate. My skin was crawling, and a cold sweat began to slick down my spine as I realized the magnitude of the parasite I had invited into my life. I pressed the record button. You are a cold son of a bitch, Julian. Silas laughed, though there was a hint of genuine shock in his tone. I am a businessman, Julian corrected him, and Elena Vance was the best investment I ever made. But the market is peaking, and it is time for me to liquidate. I watched the timer on my screen count up. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes of pure, recorded betrayal. I recorded him describing the fake signatures, the crypto transfers, and the plan to humiliate me in front of my own family and colleagues. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the woman I used to be. I leaned my head against the wall, closing my eyes for a brief second. The man inside that room was a stranger, a scavenger who had spent 3 years picking at my life while I slept beside him. My heart felt like a block of ice, heavy and jagged. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, the recording saved and backed up to my private cloud. I did not feel like a bride anymore. I felt like a soldier standing on the edge of a battlefield, and the man I once loved had just handed me the weapon I needed to end him. Julian, you have no idea what you have just done. I whispered to the empty, shadowed hallway, my voice so low it was almost a growl. You wanted a show. I will give you a masterpiece. I walked away from that door with a gait that felt heavy and mechanical, every step an effort of pure, spiteful will. I bypassed the main ballroom where the caterers were busily arranging $300 centerpieces and headed straight for the technical operations room located in the basement of the villa. This was the nerve center of the event, a small, windowless hub filled with servers, flickering monitors, and a tangle of black cables. The 2 technicians looked up, startled by the sight of a bride-to-be entering their sanctuary with a face like carved granite. Out, I said. My voice was like dry ice, leaving no room for negotiation. I need this room for 10 minutes. Leave your headsets on the table. They did not argue. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pulled my burner phone from my robe and dialed Robert Sterling, my family's longtime attorney. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. Robert, I need an emergency audit. Right now. I whispered into the receiver, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. Check every personal loan, every line of credit, and every financial obligation under my name from the past 30 days. Do not ask me why. Just find them. The silence on the other end of the line felt like an eternity. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of a keyboard as Robert worked through the secure databases. Outside the room, I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of a string quartet warming up for the ceremony. The contrast between the beautiful music and the filth I was uncovering made me want to scream. Elena, I found something. Robert finally spoke, his tone grave. There is a private equity loan for $120,000. It was finalized 48 hours ago. The signature is digital. It was verified using your secure Zenith Cloud credentials and a 2-factor authentication code sent to your primary business email. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. $120,000. Are you sure? Robert? Positive. The funds were cleared and immediately moved to an external, non-custodial wallet. Elena, it looks like you signed it yourself during your lunch hour on Tuesday. A bitter, hysterical laugh almost escaped my throat. Tuesday. I was at my final dress fitting on Tuesday. Julian had been there, hovering over me with a glass of champagne and my laptop, claiming he needed me to approve a few last-minute vendor payments so I would not have to worry about them later. He had exploited the one thing I gave him freely, my trust. He had used the chaos of the wedding planning to slip a digital death warrant past me. Thank you, Robert. Stay by your phone. I am going to need a formal fraud affidavit filed within the hour. I hung up and immediately dialed Clara. My mind was now operating with the cold, clinical efficiency of a high-speed processor. Clara, I need the IP access logs for my Zenith Cloud account for the last month. I commanded, skipping the pleasantries. Compare them to the MAC address of Julian's MacBook. I want to know exactly where he was when those authorizations happened. I already have the remote access records open. Elena, I was looking at them when we spoke earlier. Clara's voice was trembling. The logins occurred while you were in board meetings, and once at 4 in the morning while you were logged out from your main terminal. The IP matches the mesh network at your apartment. He was sitting right next to you. Or in the other room, while he robbed you. The pain in my chest did not vanish. It simply changed state. It transformed from a suffocating weight into a sharp, directional current of electricity that ran through my brain. The man I had shared my bed with for 36 months had spent those nights calculating how to strip me of everything I had worked for. He had turned my own success into a weapon to be used against me. I looked at the master control panel for the villa's media displays. This room controlled the giant LED screens in the garden and the live stream that Julian had so insistently set up for his international investors. He wanted a public stage for his grand exit. He wanted to paint me as a broken, unstable woman while he walked away with a small fortune. "You want a show." "Julian," I muttered, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I began to bypass the admin locks on the media server. "I am going to give you a premiere that Seattle will never forget." I began to upload the audio file from the hallway, followed by the PDF copies of the forged loan documents Robert had just emailed me. I was not just planning a defense anymore. I was programming a total systematic demolition of Julian Thorne's life. The countdown to 11:45 had begun, and for the first time that morning, the metallic taste in my mouth was gone, replaced by the cold, iron tang of resolve. The door to the bridal suite opened with a soft, expensive click. Julian walked in, looking every bit the American dream in his midnight blue tuxedo. He carried a massive bouquet of white peonies, their petals so pale they looked like they were made of milk. He looked at me with a warmth that would have melted me just 24 hours ago. But now, it felt like looking at a wolf wearing the skin of a golden retriever. "Elena, you look absolutely breathtaking," he murmured, his voice smooth like aged bourbon. He stepped behind me as I sat at the vanity, placing his hands on my shoulders. I could feel the heat radiating from his palms through the thin silk of my robe. He leaned down and pressed his face into the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. The scent of his $500 cologne, a sharp mix of pineapple and oak moss, hit me like a physical wave. Usually, I loved that smell. Today, it made the bile rise in my throat. It smelled like greed. It smelled like the scotch he had been drinking while he laughed about ruining me. "We are finally here. Aren't we?" he whispered against my skin. "Just a few more hours and we start our life. A life where you do not have to carry the whole world on your shoulders anymore. We are going to be so happy." I looked at him through the reflection in the heavy, ornate mirror, while his lips were formed into a tender smile against my neck. His eyes were cold and darting. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the gold Rolex on his wrist, then at the clock on the wall, calculating the seconds until his performance began. He was a predator timing his strike, and I was the prey he thought he had already cornered. "I just want everything to be perfect," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Everything exactly as you planned. Julian." He stepped back, his eyes landing on my smartphone resting on the marble vanity. He reached for it with a casual, practiced grace. "Actually, sweetheart, why don't you let me take this? You shouldn't be distracted by work emails or Clara's frantic messages today. You deserve to be present. I will keep it safe in my pocket, just for the ceremony." He thought he was so clever. He wanted to ensure that when the bank sent the final confirmation text for the $120,000 transfer, or when the fraud alerts started pinging, I would be blissfully unaware. He wanted to cut my line to the outside world. I forced a small, shy smile and picked up the phone, handing it to him. "You are right, as always. Take it. I don't want to hear from anyone but you today. It was a decoy. It was an identical model I had prepared months ago for a tech detox weekend we never took. It was locked, wiped of all banking apps. and useless to him. He slid it into his tuxedo pocket with a look of pure, smug satisfaction. He truly believed he had me. As he turned to leave, he paused by the door. Outside in the hallway, I could see Silas and Marcus leaning against the stone pillars. They were not dressed like guests, they looked like accomplices. As Julian caught their gaze, Silas gave a sharp, knowing nod and Marcus winked, a gesture that said the fuse was lit and the explosion was imminent. A wave of chilling clarity washed over me. This was not just Julian's singular greed. This was a collective hunt. They were a pack of men who looked at women like me, women who had built their own empires, who had worked for every cent as nothing more than high-yield savings accounts to be drained. They saw my success as an insult and my heart as a weakness to be exploited. "I will see you at the altar." "Elena," Julian said, blowing me a kiss before disappearing into the hall. The second the door closed, I reached under the vanity and pulled out my real phone, the one that held the power to destroy him. My fingers flew across the screen. I opened the encrypted messaging app and found the thread for the event's lead IT coordinator. Plan B, change all media files at 11:45. I typed. I hit send and watched the little checkmark turn blue. The trap was set. Julian Thorne wanted a wedding that would make history. I was going to make sure he got exactly what he asked for. Without wasting a second, I pulled up the emergency security portal for the private credit union and initiated an encrypted chat. "This is Elena Vance, account number ending in 0492. I am reporting a massive, ongoing fraud." I whispered into the headset, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I have just sent you an encrypted file. It contains an audio recording of Julian Thorne admitting to forging my digital signature for a loan of $120,000. I need you to freeze the account. Now, Ms. Vance, we see the transaction is currently in the pending stage." The security officer replied, his voice clinical and detached. "Stop it. Stop it before the clearinghouse processes the final batch. If that money moves to the crypto wallet, I will never see it again. Please, do your job." I held my breath, watching the progress bar on the screen. For a few agonizing seconds, it flickered. Then, the status of the transfer shifted from processing to flagged for review. He had the money in his sights, but I had just pulled it back from the edge of the cliff. He would see the balance. He would see the transaction initiated, but he wouldn't be able to touch a single cent. While the bank worked, I contacted Robert Sterling again. The police. "Robert, are they ready? The affidavit is filed. Elena." A detective from the Financial Crimes Division is already on his way to the villa. They are going to wait until the ceremony begins to ensure they catch him in the act of the secondary fraud, the one where he attempts to publicly defame you for financial leverage. "We have documented the identity theft and the unauthorized use of your business IP address." My eyes drifted to a second monitor. I had successfully bypassed the encryption on the live stream Julian had secretly commissioned. He had hired a high-end production crew, telling them it was for a surprise announcement to be broadcast to his associates and investors. He wanted the world to see him stand up to the tyrant who controlled his life. He wanted to be a martyr for the cameras, a man who chose his dignity over my millions. I did not just block the signal. I redirected the entire feed through my own private server at Zenith Cloud. Every frame of video and every word captured by his hidden lapel microphone was now being recorded and mirrored onto the giant LED screens scattered throughout the villa gardens. He thought he was broadcasting to his secret audience. He did not realize he was broadcasting to me and every guest on the property. Using a remote monitoring tool I had installed on our shared home network months ago for data backups, I caught a glimpse of Julian's own smartphone screen. He was currently in the groom's suite, staring at his notes app. The title of his latest entry made my blood run cold. "Freedom from the Dictator." I watched through the remote feed as he edited the text. He was refining the lines, trying to make sure the tremor in his voice would sound authentic when he told the crowd how I had broken his spirit with my money and my demands. He was practicing the way he would look down at me from the altar, pitying me as he walked away into his new, stolen life. He even included a line about how he hoped I would get the psychiatric help I so desperately needed. You pathetic, parasitic coward, I hissed at the screen, my eyes burning. The anger that had been a chaotic storm inside me suddenly distilled into something much more dangerous. It was no longer a fire, it was a cooling system. It was a perfect, tactical plan that hummed with the frequency of a well-oiled machine. I was no longer the woman who was too stupid to see the truth. I was the architect of a systematic demolition, Julian. You really should have checked the security protocols on your own devices, I muttered to the empty room, a small, dark smile touching my lips for the first time that morning. You wanted to show the world who I really am. Well, let us show them who you are instead. I checked the clock on the server. It was nearly 11 o'clock. The guests were beginning to take their seats under the white roses, unaware that they were about to witness a trial rather than a wedding. I closed the laptop, smoothed the silk of my dress, and prepared to play the role of the blushing bride for just a few minutes more. The countdown to 11:45 was ticking, and I was the one holding the stopwatch. The door creaked open again, but this time it was not a technician or a co-conspirator. It was Julian's mother, Eleanor, a woman who wore her pearls like a leash and her disdain like a second skin. She stepped into the room, her eyes sweeping over my reflection with a cold, analytical precision. To her, I was never the woman who built a multi-million-dollar media empire from nothing. I was simply the girl from a working-class neighborhood who had been lucky enough to catch her son's eye. There you are, she said, her voice thin and sharp. I thought you might have locked yourself away in a fit of nerves. You really should be out there greeting the guests. Elena, it is your duty to ensure Julian looks as prominent as he deserves to be today. I turned slowly, my face a mask of practiced indifference. Prominent, Eleanor. I thought the wedding was about a union, not a branding exercise. She laughed, a dry, hollow sound that barely reached her throat. Do not be naive. A man of Julian's caliber requires a certain level of presentation. You must understand that as his wife. Your primary role is to facilitate his lifestyle. He has a pedigree to maintain. And frankly, you should feel incredibly lucky that he chose you to share in it. You have the money. Yes. But he has the grace. It is a fair trade, provided you do not forget your place. I felt the familiar heat of anger prickling at my skin, but I kept it under lock and key. You are right, Eleanor. Grace and luxury are very important, but luxury is often incredibly expensive, especially when it is built on a foundation of lies and theft. Her eyes narrowed, the pearls at her neck shifting as she stiffened. What on earth are you talking about? If this is some sort of dramatic outburst about the wedding costs, I suggest you compose yourself immediately. Julian does not have the patience for your middle-class insecurities today. Before she could continue her lecture, Julian himself strode into the room. He looked agitated, his jaw tight and his eyes darting toward the pocket where he had stashed my decoy phone. He was clearly looking for a reason to snap, a way to bait me into the unstable behavior he needed for his upcoming performance. Elena, we need to talk about the final payment for the florist. He barked, his voice loud enough to be heard by anyone passing in the hall. I just saw the invoice for $3,000. Are you really going to be this difficult about every single cent? It is embarrassing. You make me feel like I have to beg for every breath I take in this relationship. He was setting the stage, creating a narrative of financial control for his mother to witness. I stood up, the heavy silk of my gown rustling like a warning. I walked toward him until I was inches away, staring directly into those calculating blue eyes. Is that what you think? Julian, That I am being difficult about the money I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I think you are obsessed with power, he spat, leaning in. I think you use your bank account to suffocate me. I can't live like this. I won't be your puppet anymore. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply reached out and straightened his silk tie with a slow, deliberate motion. Julian. Stop. Take a deep breath. Today is a big day. In fact, I can promise you one thing before we walk out there. Today, you are going to receive exactly what you deserve. He froze for a second, the hidden malice in his eyes flickering with a momentary confusion. But then, a slow, smug smile spread across his face. He took my words as a final surrender, a promise that I was going to hand over the control and the funds he had been craving. He thought he had finally broken me. I am glad you finally see it my way, he murmured, his voice returning to that oily, seductive tone. Let us go give them the show they paid for. He offered his arm, but I ignored it, turning to grab my bouquet of white peonies. I walked out of the suite and toward the grand entrance of the garden. The dress, which had felt like a dream during the fittings, now felt like 100 pounds of white lead. It was not a gown anymore. It was a suit of armor, cold and impenetrable. As I reached the edge of the long, floral-lined aisle, the string quartet began the first notes of the processional music. The sound was beautiful, soaring through the mist-covered gardens of the villa. But to me, it sounded like the opening gavel of a high-stakes trial. I looked down the long path toward the altar where Julian was already standing, framed by white roses and the heavy, expensive lenses of his live-stream cameras. The guests rose in a wave of silk and wool, their faces blurred by the fog and my own singular focus. I took my first step, my heels sinking slightly into the damp earth. Every step was a countdown. Every beat of my heart was a reminder of the $120,000 he tried to steal and the 36 months of my life he had wasted. I was not walking toward a marriage. I was walking toward an execution. He Garden was a sea of curated perfection, a sprawling landscape of false smiles and expensive silk that cost me over $50,000 just for the floral arrangements. More than 300 guests, the absolute elite of Seattle's business and social circles, sat in rows of white mahogany chairs beneath towering arches of ivory roses. I could see my colleagues from Zenith Cloud and the high-profile investors who had only agreed to come because of my reputation. They were all here to witness what they thought was the union of the year. Julian stood at the altar, looking like a god in the shifting light. He held a wireless microphone in his right hand, the one he had insisted on having so he could speak his heart to the world. As I grew closer, I saw him make a sharp, subtle flick of his wrist toward the lead cameraman. The lens immediately pivoted, focusing tightly on my face, capturing every micro-expression for the thousands of people watching the secret live stream. He wanted the world to see the exact moment my heart supposedly broke. The Seattle sun finally broke through the morning fog, its light refracting through the massive glass domes of the villa's conservatory. It created a shimmering, ethereal glow that danced across the white petals and the crystal glassware. It was a breathtakingly beautiful scene, an absolute masterpiece of staging that felt like a cruel, sickening joke. I was walking through a dreamscape built on the bones of a lie. In the front row, I caught Silas's eye. He was not even trying to look like a supportive groomsman anymore. He had his phone held high, his thumb ready to capture the event from a different angle. He gave me a thin, oily smile that made my skin crawl. He and Marcus were like vultures circling a carcass, waiting for Julian to tear the first piece of flesh away. I forced myself to keep moving. Each step I took across the damp, manicured grass felt like a clean, surgical incision, cutting away the 36 months of blindness that had led me here. My heels did not falter. My back was straight. I was not a bride walking toward her husband. I was a judge walking toward a bench. I was walking away from the woman who let a parasite into her bed and toward the woman who would make him pay for every second of it. When I finally reached the altar, I stood directly in front of him. The scent of the roses was suffocating, thick and sweet like rotting fruit. Julian looked down at me, and for a moment, his expression shifted. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph masked by a thin layer of mock pity. He looked at me as if I were a tragic figure, a small, weak creature that he was about to put out of its misery. "Elena, you have no idea how much this is going to hurt," he whispered, leaning in so only I could hear. His breath smelled of the expensive scotch he had used to toast my ruin. "But do not worry. I will make sure the world knows it was all your fault." The minister, a man with a gentle face and a voice like worn velvet, stepped forward and opened his book. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman." Julian did not even let him finish the opening prayer. He let out a sharp, theatrical throat clearing that cut through the air like a gunshot. He raised the microphone, his hand steady and his eyes fixed on the camera lens. "Wait. Father. Stop," Julian said, his voice booming through the hidden speakers with a fake, trembling emotion. I cannot let this go on any longer. There is something everyone here needs to know before another word is spoken." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the collective gasp of 300 people holding their breath. The trap was sprung. Julian Thorne was ready to begin his masterpiece of destruction. Julian gripped the microphone, his knuckles turning white as he looked out over the crowd. He took a long, shuddering breath, the kind of theatrical pause designed to pull every ounce of attention toward his supposed heartbreak. When he spoke, his voice was a low, practiced tremor that echoed through the garden speakers, dripping with a sorrow that felt like cheap oil. I am so sorry to everyone here, but I cannot continue to lie to myself, or to any of you, any longer." Julian began, bowing his head as if the weight of the moment was too much for his shoulders. A wave of sharp whispers surged through the seated guests. I saw heads leaning together, the business partners I had worked with for years looking at each other with wide, hungry eyes. The scandal was a more delicious meal than the 5-course dinner waiting in the tent. "I came here today wanting to believe we could make this work," Julian continued, his voice growing stronger, more accusing. "But the truth is, I have been living in a golden cage for 36 months. Elena, you have spent every single day of our relationship trying to control me, trying to mold me into a version of myself that fits your cold, calculated brand. You used your money like a whip, making sure I knew that every breath I took was paid for by you. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a possession." He turned to face me, his eyes wet with fake tears that sparkled under the Seattle sun. "You laughed at my dreams. You told me my business ideas were worthless unless they were under your Zenith Cloud umbrella. You thought I was too stupid to realize I was just a decoration, a prop in your ambitious, lonely life. You thought you could buy my soul with your credit limits and your luxury cars." The silence in the garden was suffocating. I glanced toward the front row. My mother was clutching her chest, her face pale as she stared at the man she had welcomed as a son. My father looked like he had been struck. Meanwhile, Silas and Marcus were leaning back in their chairs, wearing the dark, smug grins of men who knew exactly how this scene was supposed to end. Julian took a step toward the edge of the altar. projecting his voice to the very back of the audience and into the lenses of the cameras he believed were broadcasting his liberation. The truth is, Elena, you are the one who is too stupid to realize that your money can never, ever buy my respect. I am done being your victim. I am leaving this altar, and I am leaving you with the only thing you have ever truly loved, your empty, cold bank account. The finality of his words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He stood there for a heartbeat, panting slightly as if the effort of the truth had exhausted him. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He was the hero of his own story, the brave man walking away from the tyrannical woman. He dropped the microphone onto the silk-covered stage with a heavy, final thud and prepared to turn his back on me, his eyes already seeking out Silas and Marcus to signal their exit. I did not move. I did not reach for him or beg him to stay. I did not let a single tear touch my face. Instead, I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the white peonies. I felt a strange, cold peace wash over me. I waited until the exact moment he began his triumphant turn, and then I looked directly at the lead technician in the control booth. I gave a single, decisive nod. The air seemed to vibrate as the massive LED screens behind the altar suddenly flickered and died. A low hum filled the garden, replacing the music, and for the first time that day, the smug smile on Julian's face began to falter. He paused, his foot hovering over the first step of his escape, as he realized that the show was far from over. Then, a deep, hollow silence fell over the garden, broken only by the sharp, electric hum of the audio system being overridden. A second later, a voice boomed through the speakers. It was not the voice of the man currently standing before the crowd with a look of fake sorrow. It was the sharp, jagged, and arrogant laugh of Julian Thorne from the groom's lounge just hours ago. She is too stupid to realize I have been using her. Julian's recorded voice echoed, drowning out the gasps of the 300 guests. I just slipped the papers in between the dress fittings, and she just signed. I've got $120,000 moving to the clearing account right now. The crowd erupted into a chaotic wave of whispers and shocked murmurs. Julian stood frozen, his hand still reaching toward the microphone on the floor, his face shifting from a pale white to a sickly ashen gray. He looked up at the screens as they roared back to life. But this time, they did not show my face. They showed high-resolution images of the private equity loan contracts. My digital signature was circled in a violent red, followed by a data log that showed the authorization had come from Julian's personal laptop IP address at 4 a.m. Next came the screenshots, a long, damning list of crypto transactions moving my funds into a private wallet, followed by his text messages with Silas. The screen displayed one message in giant, bold letters. Once I squeeze this lemon dry, I am throwing the peel in the trash. She is just a milk cow with a black card. I watched Julian's eyes dart toward the cameras he had hired. The red recording lights were still on. He realized, with a visible shudder, that this was no longer his broadcast of liberation. This was a public trial being streamed live to 10,000 people, including his potential investors and the very elite he had tried so hard to impress. I stepped forward and picked up the microphone he had dropped. My voice was no longer the soft, agreeable tone of a bride. It was a roar of stone-cold authority that cut through the noise of the crowd like a knife. I am not stupid, Julian, I said, looking him directly in his hollow, panicked eyes. I am a businesswoman, and while you were busy rehearsing your pathetic little performance as a victim, I was busy gathering every single scrap of evidence for the criminal case you are about to face. The guests were standing now, their phones recording the carnage. I saw Silas and Marcus trying to slip away toward the back of the garden, but their faces were already plastered on the screens as accomplices. I did not just record you, Julian. I continued, my voice gaining power with every word. I have already been in contact with the credit union. Every cent of that $120,000 has been flagged and frozen. You thought you were walking away with my future. You are walking away with nothing. I had the locks on the apartment changed 2 hours ago. Your designer suits, your watches. Everything I paid for is currently being inventoried for the fraud recovery. Elena, please. It is a misunderstanding, Julian stammered, his voice cracking as he took a desperate step toward me. His eyes were wide, darting around the garden like a trapped animal. I can explain everything. Silas, tell her. Do not come near me, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low growl. You wanted a show, Julian. You wanted the world to see the real Elena Vance. Well, here I am, and this is the real you. A thief, a liar, and a coward who could not even rob me without getting caught. He snapped. The mask of the refined gentleman hero shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He let out a guttural, animalistic snarl and lunged at me, his fingers clawing the air as he tried to snatch the microphone from my hand. Give me that you ruined everything. Before his hand could even touch the lace of my sleeve, 2 large men in black suits stepped from the wings of the altar. They caught him mid-air with a brutal, practiced efficiency, twisting his arms behind his back and forcing him down onto the very stage where he had planned to destroy me. Julian Thorne was pinned to the floor, his face pressed against the white silk runner, screaming into the dirt while the world watched his final, pathetic act. I stood above Julian as he writhed on the white runner, his expensive tuxedo stained with the dirt of the garden he had intended to use as my graveyard. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder and more frantic until 4 Seattle police cruisers skidded to a halt at the edge of the villa's driveway. A group of officers moved with practiced urgency through the crowd of 300 stunned guests, their dark uniforms a stark, jagged contrast to the sea of ivory roses and champagne silk. Julian Thorne, a detective, asked, stepping onto the altar and looking down at the man being pinned by my security team. You are under arrest for financial fraud, criminal forgery, and grand larceny involving the unauthorized use of digital credentials. We have the warrants for your arrest and for the search of your primary residence. Julian's eyes went wide as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The cold, heavy sound of metal against metal echoed through the speakers, a final punctuation mark to his failed scheme. Just a few yards away, I saw Silas and Marcus being intercepted by 2 other officers. They tried to protest, their faces flushed with a mixture of terror and guilt as they were read their rights. But the police were not listening. They were led away as accomplices in a conspiracy to embezzle more than $120,000. Julian looked up at me, his hair disheveled and his face streaked with sweat. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic hunger for survival. Elena, please, listen to me. It was all for us. I did it to build us a better future. I just wanted to be your equal. Please, do not let them do this. I love you. His voice broke, a ragged, gasping sound that might have moved me a lifetime ago. Now, it only filled me with a sense of profound, icy relief. I stepped closer, the train of my heavy silk gown rustling against the stage. I leaned down, my lips inches from his ear so that only he could hear the final truth. You were right about one thing, Julian, I whispered, my voice as sharp and steady as a diamond. I was so stupid to love a parasite like you, but I am smart enough to make sure you will never. ever spend a single penny of my money again. Goodbye, Julian. Enjoy your cell. I stood back up and signaled the security team to let the officers take him. Julian was dragged away, screaming my name until his voice was lost in the slamming of a cruiser door. The man who had spent 36 months calculatedly stripping away my life was now being driven toward a future of debt, lawsuits, and a prison sentence that would ensure his career was permanently buried before the eyes of 10,000 viewers. I turned away from the driveway and looked out at the guests. My parents were standing in the front row, tears of shock still on my mother's face. But as I caught her eye, she gave me a small, trembling nod of pride. I took the microphone one last time. I apologize for the change in the program, I said, my voice projecting with a newfound radiant power. There will be no wedding today. Instead, this has become a celebration of my freedom. The champagne is already paid for. The food is prepared. I invite every one of you to stay and join me in marking the beginning of the rest of my life. The bar is officially open. The tension that had gripped the garden for the last hour finally shattered. A low murmur of approval grew into a roar of applause as I reached up and unpinned the heavy lace veil from my hair. I let the white fabric fall to the floor, a ghost of a past I was no longer haunted by. I stepped off the altar, walking past the rows of guests who were now standing to honor the woman I had become. The Seattle sun was warm on my face as I walked through the crowd. My head held high. I had lost a fiancé, but I had saved my empire and my soul. The $150,000 wedding was a small price to pay for the clarity I now possessed. As I reached the end of the aisle, I did not look back. I was walking toward a horizon that was finally, beautifully mine. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Mia Revenge Stories, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.